How do we seem to you? Do you find us beautiful? Magical? Our white skin, our fierce eyes. Drink, you ask me. Do you have any idea of the thing you will become?
Most people today have asked themselves at one point, what would it be like to be a vampire? Or wouldn't it be cool to be a vampire? The vampire is of course a monster, a fiend, a personification of fear. Not many people think it would be cool to be a ghoul or a zombie, so what makes the vampire different? Is it their immortality, their youth, their superheroic feats of strength? Well, maybe those things make them cool, but the reason the vampire story has become so pervasive for so long is their ability to shape change. Not into bats and wolves, but into different kinds of stories and inherit a vast array of themes and archetypes. In the last video, we revealed the two masks that Strahd Bonzarevich wears, exploring how his character embodies the sinister traits of Bluebeard and the dark allure of a Byronic villain. Strahd casts a long shadow over D&D, but vampires are more than just Strahd, and more than just reflections of Gothic literature. They're evolving legends. Vampires have stalked our imaginations for centuries, and their journey from the aristocratic horror of Polidori's vampire and the dread-inducing Strahd to the tween heartthrobs of Twilight is a fascinating evolution. In this video, we're going to examine a timeline of the vampire in the past century. We'll spotlight key case studies that offer diverse themes and ideas, which you can weave into your own games. Whether you're looking to terrify your players or challenge their expectations, we'll explore how these iconic creatures have transformed over time, and how you can break the Strahd mold to create vampires that transcend the expected tropes, perhaps even embracing more recent ones.
You better hold on tight, spider monkey.
The story of the vampire is so intimately connected with the story of humanity. Ideas about the vampire, the stalking creature that feeds on humans' life force, have been developed in a multitude of cultures across the world. From the Impindulu to Lilith to Strigoi and more, the story of the vampire has not one origin, but many. These myths share common threads, themes of death, the afterlife, forbidden desires, and the fear of the unknown. Yet each culture shapes its vampire to reflect local fears and values. And as we discussed in the previous video, the Western literary traditional vampire largely owes its identity to Polidori's The Vampire. Polidori's work established the vampire as a powerful noble figure, a suave and aristocratic predator who torments the hero and preys upon their loved ones. This depiction would set the stage for the vampire's evolution in literature, where each subsequent author would add their own brushstrokes to the vampire mythos. Varney the Vampire, 1847, introduced several key characteristics that are now synonymous with vampires: fangs, long nails, scientific investigation, and an Eastern European origin of the vampire character. Varney would even be the first inkling of a sympathetic vampire, showing Varney as having feelings and beholden to his vampiric condition that is largely out of his control. Then came Carmilla, 1872, a novella by Sheridan Le Fanu, which not only adhered to the major trappings of the literary vampire, but also had a female vampire that pursued a young woman named Laura, engaging her in a romantic relationship. Carmilla is credited with originating a subtype of literary vampires that feature lesbian relationships, and that queer contribution would later be used as a vector for otherwise censored lesbian stories to be published. Carmilla was also very gender progressive, especially for its time. And this brings us to our first archetype, the invited enemy. Professor Julianne Olin, in her essay In Open Graves, Open Minds, discusses how vampire literature, particularly the work of Irish authors like Le Fanu, often draws on themes from Irish history. Carmilla is a prime example of this, reflecting anxieties about colonialism and invasion. Dr. Olin points to motifs of the colonization of Ireland by the English in Le Fanu's writing. Olin is referring to the actions of Mac Murdoch, King of Leinster, who petitioned the English crown for assistance after he was deposed. His actions culminated in military action, settlement, and claiming of Ireland by the English, and this is often referred to as the invited invasion of Ireland. In Carmilla, this motif is cleverly mirrored by the vampire herself. Carmilla manipulates her way into the family of the protagonist, Laura, and is welcomed into their home. This invited invasion plays on the mythos that vampires need to be invited into a home, but once that invitation is extended, they can return at will. Many stories involve the vampire receiving an invitation from their victim and then returning to feed upon them. Carmilla deepens this by exploring how the vampire not only invades the home, but also the psyche of Laura, as they grow close and engage in a romantic relationship. The invasion is both physical and psychological, illustrating how trust can be exploited by those with darker intentions. In a D&D campaign, you can introduce this archetype by creating an apparent ally who seeks an invitation into the party space or trust, a classic ally to enemy switcheroo. This invitation could culminate in the vampire's desire to feed on or turn the party members, or something more long-term, like turning one party member against the others. The concept of the invited enemy can also extend beyond the literal, involving the vampire subtly influencing or corrupting a party member, making them a conduit for their dark plans. This approach adds layers to the story, creating tension as the players slowly realize the depth of the vampire's infiltration. For a particularly immersive experience, you could have a player willingly take on the role similar to Lara's, with their character being the focal point of the vampire's attention. The narrative then becomes not just about external conflict, but also about internal struggle, as the character wrestles with their feelings of betrayal, fear, and perhaps even lingering affection for the vampire. The slow unraveling of this relationship can be a powerful storytelling tool, leading to a dramatic confrontation where the party must reconcile the trusted ally they once knew with the monster they have become. As we move forward in time, we encounter Dracula, 1897, Bram Stoker's iconic novel that cemented many of the tropes and themes we associate with vampires today. Dracula has had an immeasurable influence on vampire lore, with countless adaptations and reinterpretations in various media. What I want to highlight is the idea of the Occult Detective, a title that belongs to the iconic Van Helsing. Van Helsing is not just a vampire hunter, he is a learned man, a scholar of the occult, who brings scientific and mystical knowledge to bear against the supernatural. He represents a fusion of reason and faith, using both to combat the forces of darkness. In D&D, Van Richten serves as a direct homage to Van Helsing, guiding players through the mysteries and dangers of the Ravenloft setting. The Occult Detective archetype is versatile, and can be used in various phases of a D&D campaign. Players might create characters in this mold, blending detective skills with knowledge of the arcane to hunt monsters. Alternatively, you can introduce an NPC who fills this role, guiding the party as they confront supernatural threats. The Occult Detective serves as a mentor, an exposition device, and a driving force in the plot. Their knowledge of vampire lore, combined with their personal vendetta, often provides the impetus for the adventure. The Occult Detective NPC can serve as a mentor, an engine of the plot against the vampire. An easy refrain is making it a revenge story, where the party seeks out a vampire who has slain their Occult Detective mentor, and they then grow into competent Occult Detectives themselves. Contemporary examples of the Occult Detective include the Dresden Files, where Harry Dresden combines his wizarding abilities with detective work, Grimm, which follows a modern-day descendant of the Brothers Grimm who hunts creatures from folklore, True Blood, where various characters investigate and combat supernatural beings, and Supernatural, which blends horror, folklore, and detective work. Jumping ahead to 1986, where the iconic video game Castlevania is released. The original game was a fairly stock and standard vampire tale, with the hero Simon Belmont facing down Dracula. The part that's of interest is the story's theme of Ancestral Sin. Ancestral Sin is a biblical idea that revolves around individuals inheriting the sins of their ancestors. Essentially, if your grandfather committed a sin, it's as good as if you had committed it. This idea isn't necessarily exclusive to the religious concept of sin, but it can include any transgression or even a mantle of responsibility being passed to someone. The story of Castlevania involves the Belmonts passing down the mantle of Vampire Hunter. The concept of ancestral sin appears in many more vampire stories, such as Carmilla, who is an ancestor to Lara and is slain with the help of a descendant of a vampire hunter. Vampires themselves embody ancestral sin, the idea of a vampire being beholden to the one that originally turned them, who are themselves bound all the way up to the original vampire. If the original vampire perishes, all vampires perish, linking vampires to the idea of the original sin. For your game, you can utilize this ancestral theme to create a connection to the vampire or to a vampire hunter that unlocks the key to the party's victory, or as a plot hook. This could involve traveling to ancient forgotten places tied to their family's history, battling spirits of the past, or seeking redemption by performing a great deed that counteracts the original sin or defeats the enemy that embodies it. Ancestral sin can also be used to introduce moral ambiguity into your campaign. What if the ancestors of the party were not heroes, but villains? What if the vampire they're hunting was once wronged by their forebears, cursed not by their own actions, but by the sins of the party's ancestors? This twist forces the party to confront the darker aspects of their legacy, making the eventual confrontation with the vampire not just a battle of might, but a reckoning with their own heritage. For our next stop on the timeline, we're going to head to 1973, the debut of the Marvel Comics character Blade, who went on to have his own stories, including a film adaptation in 1998. Blade is a vampire hunter, but unlike most, he's half vampire, half human, a dampire. Much like stories told of other half-races, such as half-elves, Blade fits with neither humans nor vampire society. He embodies the theme of otherness. The idea of otherness and othering is rooted in the idea of in-group and out-group, where those like you are perceived as good, and those who are different are seen as bad. This concept has deep implications in psychology, philosophy, and politics. Otherness can manifest as fear of the unknown, xenophobia, or prejudice, where the other is demonized and marginalized. In vampire stories, this manifests in the way vampires are often portrayed as both outsiders and enemies, their existence a challenge to societal norms and values. In the latter half of the 20th century, vampire stories increasingly explored the theme of otherness, fully embracing the idea of the vampire as a sympathetic romantic figure, formerly human, yet unable to live a full life among humans. This shift in perspective allowed vampire stories to be used as metaphors for various social issues, including racism, nationalism, and the struggle of marginalized communities. By presenting the vampire as an othered figure, these stories challenge the audience to reconsider their preconceptions about what it means to be human and what it means to be a monster. For Blade, his vampire nature that others him is also what makes him strong, and able to defend humanity so astutely against vampire predators. In D&D, you can explore themes of otherness by incorporating a vampire character or a noble vampire NPC who defies expectations by turning away from their bloodthirsty nature. This can lead to a deeper exploration of the nature of evil, challenging players to reconsider what it means to be a monster. Is evil inherent in the vampire's nature, or is it a choice? Can a vampire, or any creature considered monstrous, choose to reject their darker instincts and pursue a path of good? This question can form the basis of a compelling moral dilemma for the party, as they must decide whether to trust this noble vampire or treat them as just another monster. As Nina Auerbach would say, every age embraces the vampire it needs, and each campaign can do the same.